Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people's story. Inheriting my grandfather's 150-acre ranch 6 months ago was both a blessing and a massive responsibility I never saw coming. OP had always assumed the property would go to one of my older cousins who actually knew something about ranching, but apparently my grandfather saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. The ranch had been in the family for 3 generations, but it had been neglected for the past few years as my grandfather's health declined. The property was beautiful, but run down. The main house needed new siding and a roof repair, the barns required structural work, and the fencing around the perimeter was falling apart in several places. What the ranch did have going for it was a well-maintained fuel storage system that my grandfather had installed years ago to keep his tractors, generators, and other equipment running. 2 large above-ground tanks held diesel and gasoline respectively, positioned near the dirt road that cut through the eastern edge of the property. That road was part of an old easement agreement from the 1960s that allowed public access through a small portion of the ranch. My grandfather had never minded it since it only affected about a quarter mile of the property and brought him occasional visitors who would stop to chat or buy fresh eggs from his chickens. The road connected 2 county highways and saved people about 10 miles of driving, so it got regular use from locals. Since OP worked remotely doing web development and database management, the ranch was perfect for my lifestyle. I could work from anywhere with internet, and the peace and quiet helped me focus. My plan was to slowly restore the property using my savings and the income from my tech job. I wasn't in any hurry, and I enjoyed the process of bringing the place back to life. The fuel theft started about 2 months after I moved in, but it took me a while to notice. At first, I thought the gauge on the gasoline tank was just old and inaccurate. The level seemed to drop faster than what I was using for the riding mower and chainsaw, but I figured it might be evaporation or a slow leak somewhere in the system. It was my neighbor Dave who first suggested something might be wrong. Dave owned the farm adjacent to my southern border and had been friends with my grandfather for decades. He stopped by one afternoon to check on how I was settling in. Dave mentioned that he'd seen a large SUV parked near my fuel tanks a couple times recently. He said it looked like someone was doing something around the tanks, but couldn't tell what from his property. When I asked him to describe the vehicle, he said it was a big black SUV, probably a Suburban or Expedition with a woman driving. That conversation got me thinking more seriously about the fuel situation. I decided to do a proper measurement and see if my suspicions were correct. I used a long dipstick to measure the exact level in the tank and took a photo with my phone showing the measurement. I also wrote down the reading in a notebook along with the date and time. 3 days later, I measured again. The level had dropped by almost 8 gallons, but I had only used about 1.5 gallons for yard work. There was definitely something wrong, and it wasn't evaporation or a leak. Looking around the area more carefully, I found tire tracks in the soft dirt near the tank that definitely weren't from my pickup truck. The tread pattern was different, and the wheelbase was wider. Someone with a larger vehicle had been parking there regularly. I knew I needed evidence before confronting anyone or calling the police. Security cameras seemed like the obvious solution, but I wanted something discreet that wouldn't be immediately obvious to whoever was taking my fuel. After researching options online, I ordered a motion-activated trail camera designed for wildlife monitoring. These cameras were camouflaged to look like bark and could record both photos and videos triggered by movement. Installing the camera was tricky because I needed a good angle on the fuel tank while keeping it hidden. I found a spot about 30 feet away where I could mount it on a fence post behind some tall weeds. The camera had infrared capability for night recording and could run for weeks on a set of batteries. The wait for results was nerve-wracking. I checked the camera every couple of days, but for the first week there was nothing but footage of me working around the property and the occasional deer or rabbit. I was starting to wonder if maybe the theft had stopped now that I was around more often. Then I hit the jackpot. On a Thursday morning when I went to check the camera, there were 17 new video files from the previous day. I hurried back to the house to review them on my computer, and what I saw made my blood boil. A black SUV had pulled up to my fuel tank at 2:30 in the afternoon. A middle-aged woman got out and opened the rear hatch, revealing a portable electric pump and several gas cans. She connected the pump to my tank and began filling her cans, as well as what appeared to be a large auxiliary tank in the back of her SUV. The video quality was excellent. I could clearly see her face, her license plate, and even the brand of portable pump she was using. She worked efficiently like she had done this many times before. At one point, a young man who looked like he might be her teenage son got out to help carry the filled cans. What really got me was how casual and comfortable they looked. This wasn't some desperate person stealing fuel in a moment of need. This was organized, repeated theft by people who clearly felt entitled to take my property. I continued monitoring the camera and discovered they returned every 3 or 4 days, always in the afternoon between 2 and 4 p.m. Over the course of 2 weeks, I documented 6 separate incidents. They were stealing between 15 and 20 gallons each time, and I calculated they had probably taken over 200 gallons since I inherited the property. The final straw came when I discovered they had started using the area around my fuel tank as their personal dumping ground. Fast food bags, empty soda bottles, and even what looked like household trash were scattered around the base of the tank. One bag had spilled open and I could see mail addressed to a woman at an address in the suburban development about 5 miles away. I decided it was time for a direct confrontation, but I wanted to be smart about it. I made copies of the best video footage and photos, and I researched the license plate number online. The vehicle was registered to a couple living at the same address I had seen on the discarded mail. On a Tuesday afternoon, I parked my truck where I could see the fuel tank and waited. Sure enough, around 3 p.m., the black SUV came rumbling down the dirt road. I gave them a few minutes to get set up with their pump, then drove over and parked nearby. The woman looked up as I approached, and I could see the calculation in her eyes as she decided how to play this. I kept my voice friendly and non-confrontational. I explained that I was the new owner of the ranch, and that I had noticed the fuel levels dropping. I offered to help if she was having car trouble or needed assistance with something. Her response was not what I expected. Instead of embarrassment or apology, she immediately went on the attack. She claimed that the fuel tank was abandoned property on public land and that she was actually doing a community service by maintaining the area. She said she had been coming here for months and had never seen anyone around, so she assumed it was abandoned. When I showed her that we were clearly on private property and that the tank belonged to me, she became even more aggressive. She accused me of trying to intimidate her and threatened to call the police if I didn't leave her alone. She said she had every right to be there since the road was public access. Her son stood behind her nodding along, occasionally chiming in with comments about how I was harassing them. They acted like I was the one doing something wrong by questioning their presence on my property. The confrontation ended with her promising to call the police on me for harassment and trespassing. I almost laughed at the irony, but managed to keep my composure and simply told them they needed to leave my property immediately. Over the next week, they didn't return, and I thought maybe the confrontation had worked. But then I found a post on the local community Facebook page that made me realize the situation was far from over. The woman had posted a long rant about a young person who had moved into the old ranch and was now harassing locals who used the public road. She claimed I had threatened her and her son and was trying to restrict access to public areas. The post had dozens of comments, mostly from people who didn't know the full story but were sympathetic to her version of events. That convinced me that a simple confrontation wasn't going to solve this problem. These people felt entitled to my property and were willing to lie and manipulate others to justify their theft. It was time for a more comprehensive response. I started by consulting with a lawyer who specialized in property law. I brought copies of my deed, the original easement agreement, and a survey map of the property. The lawyer confirmed what I already knew, that the fuel tank was well within my private property boundaries and that the public access easement only covered the road itself, not the surrounding land. The lawyer advised me to file a police report and gather as much evidence as possible before pursuing criminal charges. He also suggested documenting everything carefully in case I needed to pursue civil action later. My next step was visiting the sheriff's department to file a formal complaint. The deputy I spoke with was helpful and professional. He reviewed my video evidence and agreed that I had a strong case for theft charges. However, he explained that for the best chance of prosecution, they would need to catch the thieves in the act, rather than just relying on surveillance footage. We worked out a plan where I would call the non-emergency number as soon as I saw them on my security camera, and a deputy would respond to catch them in the act. The deputy also suggested I consider adding some kind of marker to the fuel that would make it easier to prove theft if they were stopped later. That gave me an idea for something that would be both satisfying and legally sound. I researched fuel additives and discovered that law enforcement and businesses often use special dyes to mark gasoline and diesel fuel. These dyes were harmless to engines but created distinctive colored exhaust that was visible proof of where the fuel came from. I ordered several bottles of bright blue fuel dye, along with an additive that would create a distinctive sulfur smell in the exhaust. Both products were completely legal and wouldn't damage their vehicle, but they would provide unmistakable evidence of theft. I also installed a second camera with a cellular connection that would send alerts to my phone whenever it detected motion. This way I could monitor the fuel tank in real time and coordinate with law enforcement when the thieves returned. Preparing the trap took some patience. I drained about 50 gallons from the tank and mixed in the dye and scent additives according to the instructions. The fuel looked slightly blue and bright light, but wouldn't be obvious to someone quickly pumping it into containers. I contacted the sheriff's department and arranged for a deputy to be on standby during the afternoon hours when the thefts typically occurred. Deputy Martinez agreed to park about a mile away where he could respond quickly when I called. The waiting was the hardest part. For 3 days, nothing happened, and I started to worry they had given up or found another source for fuel. But on Thursday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the cellular camera. I watched the live feed as the familiar black SUV pulled up to my fuel tank. The woman and her son got out and began their usual routine with the portable pump and gas cans. I immediately called Deputy Martinez and stayed on the line while watching them work. This time, they were taking even more fuel than usual. They filled multiple large cans and what looked like a 55-gallon drum they had loaded in the back of their SUV. I could see they were also dumping more trash around the area. Deputy Martinez arrived just as they were finishing up and preparing to leave. I watched from my house as he pulled up behind their SUV and activated his emergency lights. What happened next was better than I could have hoped for. The woman immediately started shouting at the deputy, claiming she was being harassed and that I had called in a false report. She demanded that he arrest me for stalking and intimidation.
Deputy Martinez calmly asked her to start her vehicle and move it a few feet forward. When she did, thick blue smoke poured from the exhaust pipe, and the smell of sulfur was apparent even from where I was watching 100 yards away. The look on her face when she realized what had happened was priceless. She tried to claim that her exhaust had always been that color, but Deputy Martinez wasn't buying it. He asked her to pop the hood and check her fuel tank, which showed the distinctive blue tint of the dyed gasoline. By this time, I had walked over to join the conversation. Deputy Martinez had me show him the video footage on my phone, and the evidence was overwhelming. Not only did the videos clearly show them stealing fuel, but they were literally caught with the stolen fuel in their vehicle, marked with dye that could only have come from my tank. The woman's story fell apart completely when Deputy Martinez pointed out the pile of trash around the fuel tank that included mail with her name and address. She tried to claim someone else must have dumped it there, but her son inadvertently contradicted her by mentioning that she had told him to throw their lunch trash there the week before. Deputy Martinez issued citations for theft and illegal dumping, and he confiscated the stolen fuel as evidence. The woman's husband arrived about an hour later to drive them home since their SUV was too obvious with the blue smoke to drive around town. The criminal case moved forward quickly since the evidence was so clear. They eventually pled guilty to avoid a trial, and they were ordered to pay restitution for the stolen fuel plus fines for the illegal dumping. But I wasn't satisfied with just the criminal case. The lawyer I had consulted earlier helped me file a civil lawsuit seeking damages for the full amount of fuel stolen over the entire 6-month period, cleanup costs for the dumping, the cost of the security system, and my legal fees. The civil case was even more satisfying than the criminal charges. During discovery, we found out that the woman had been bragging on social media about her free fuel source and encouraging friends to find similar opportunities. She had even posted photos of her son helping her fill gas cans, not realizing she was creating evidence of the theft. We also discovered that she had been stealing fuel from another property owner about 10 miles away using the same methods. That property owner joined our lawsuit as a co-plaintiff. And suddenly the damages were substantial enough to make a real impact. The defendants tried to settle out of court for a small amount, but my lawyer advised against it. We had an ironclad case, and he wanted to send a message that this kind of theft wouldn't be tolerated in our community. When the case went to trial, it was almost anticlimactic. The video evidence, the dyed fuel, the social media posts, and testimony from both property owners made the outcome inevitable. The judge awarded full damages plus attorney fees, and he made some pointed comments about people who felt entitled to steal from others. The total judgment was just over $8,000, which might not sound like much, but it was apparently enough to cause serious financial problems for the defendants. We found out later that they had to sell their oversized SUV and take out a loan to pay the judgment. The best part was the impact on their reputation in the community. Word spread quickly about the couple who had been caught stealing fuel with their exhaust smoking blue. Their son was reportedly mortified at school, and the woman stopped posting on the local Facebook groups where she had previously been very active. I used the money from the settlement to upgrade the security system on the ranch and to buy a larger, more secure fuel tank with better locking mechanisms. I also invested in some solar panels and a battery backup system to make the property more self-sufficient. 6 months later, I was sitting on the restored front porch of the ranch house, watching the sunset over the pasture where I had started raising a small herd of cattle. The property was finally starting to look like the working ranch my grandfather had envisioned, and I felt proud of what I had accomplished. A car slowed down as it passed the fuel tank area, and I could see the driver looking toward my property. After a moment, the car sped up and continued down the road. I smiled, knowing that word had spread about what happened to the last people who tried to steal from this ranch. The whole experience taught me that sometimes you have to stand up for yourself and your property, even when it's uncomfortable. My grandfather would have been proud to see that I had learned to protect what was mine while building something positive for the future. The ranch was thriving, the thieves had learned their lesson, and I had come out on top in every way that mattered. Update, 2 years later, the full aftermath. It's been 2 years since the fuel theft incident, and I wanted to update everyone on how things turned out because the story got even more interesting after the initial resolution. About 6 months after the court case, I was contacted by an investigator from the state attorney general's office. Apparently, my case had caught their attention because it fit a pattern they were tracking across several rural counties. The woman and her husband weren't just casual thieves. They were part of a larger network that had been systematically targeting rural properties for various forms of theft and fraud. The investigator explained that they had been looking into reports of fuel theft, equipment theft, and even cases where people were filing false insurance claims on rural properties they didn't own. My careful documentation and the video evidence from my case became a key piece in a much larger investigation. It turned out that the woman had been running a side business selling discounted fuel to people in her suburban neighborhood. She would steal from multiple rural properties and then sell the fuel at about 75% of the regular gas station price, claiming she had connections with wholesale suppliers. Some of her customers knew it was too good to be true, but they didn't ask questions as long as they were saving money. The investigation also revealed that she had been scouting other properties in our area and had actually attempted to file a fraudulent insurance claim on an old barn that burned down on a neighboring ranch. She claimed she'd been renting the barn for storage and lost valuable items in the fire, even though she had no legitimate connection to the property. When the state charges were filed, they were much more serious than the local theft charges. The woman and her husband ended up facing felony fraud charges and were ultimately sentenced to 2 years in prison. Their son, who was a minor at the time of my incident, was sent to live with relatives in another state. The financial impact on them was severe. In addition to the restitution they owed me and the other property owner, they had to pay back thousands of dollars to the people who had bought stolen fuel from them. Their house went into foreclosure, and they lost most of their assets. But the most satisfying development came about a year after the criminal case concluded. I was contacted by a documentary crew that was making a film about rural crime and how technology was helping property owners fight back. They wanted to feature my case as an example of how regular people could use security cameras and evidence gathering to protect themselves. The documentary aired on a cable network and then became available on streaming platforms. My story was presented anonymously, but everyone in our local area knew it was about the fuel theft incident. The film helped spread awareness about these types of crimes and encouraged other rural property owners to invest in security systems. The publicity from the documentary led to some unexpected opportunities. A security company that specialized in rural properties reached out and offered me a consulting arrangement. They wanted my input on designing camera systems and security protocols specifically for ranches and farms. The consulting work brought in additional income that helped fund more improvements to the ranch. I also started a blog about rural property security and sustainable ranching practices. The blog grew into a decent side business with advertising revenue and affiliate commissions from security equipment sales. It felt good to turn my negative experience into something that could help other people protect their property. The ranch itself has been transformed over the past 2 years. I now have a herd of 40 cattle, 3 horses, and a thriving vegetable garden that supplies produce to 2 local restaurants. The main house has been completely renovated, and I've added a workshop where I restore vintage farm equipment as a hobby. The security system has been expanded to cover the entire property perimeter, and I've never had another theft incident. I occasionally get visitors who are curious about the ranch after seeing the documentary or reading my blog, and I've started offering educational tours to local school groups and youth organizations. One of the most rewarding developments has been my relationship with other ranch owners in the area. The fuel theft incident and subsequent investigation brought together a network of rural property owners who now share information about security threats and suspicious activity. We have a group chat where we alert each other about potential problems, and it's created a strong sense of community. Dave, my neighbor who first spotted the suspicious SUV, has become a close friend and mentor. He's taught me most of what I know about cattle ranching and has helped me avoid numerous rookie mistakes. We often joke that the fuel thieves accidentally did us a favor by bringing us together as a community. The fuel storage system has been completely upgraded with new tanks, better locks, and a monitoring system that alerts me if the fuel level drops unexpectedly. I've also added motion-activated lights and warning signs that make it clear the area is under surveillance. The security measures are visible enough to deter potential thieves, but not so obtrusive that they detract from the natural beauty of the ranch. I recently learned that the woman who stole my fuel was released from prison early for good behavior and has moved to another state. Part of me wonders if she learned her lesson or if she's just finding new victims in a new location. Either way, she's no longer my problem, and I hope she's found a legal way to make a living. The experience taught me that protecting your property isn't just about installing cameras and catching criminals. It's about building relationships with your neighbors, staying informed about local threats, and being willing to follow through with legal action when necessary. Too many rural property owners suffer in silence because they think nothing can be done about theft and trespassing. Most importantly, I learned that my grandfather's ranch wasn't just a piece of property. It was a legacy worth fighting for. The land has been in our family for 3 generations, and I'm determined to pass it on to the next generation in better condition than I inherited it. The fuel theft incident was stressful and expensive at the time, but it ultimately made me a better property owner and a more engaged member of my community. I came out ahead financially thanks to the lawsuit settlement and the consulting work that followed. More importantly, I proved to myself that I could handle whatever challenges came with owning and operating a ranch. Looking back, I'm grateful that I had the patience to gather evidence and pursue legal action, rather than just confronting the thieves with threats or violence. The systematic approach not only solved my immediate problem, but contributed to a larger investigation that prevented these criminals from victimizing other property owners. The ranch is now everything I hoped it would be when I first inherited it. A peaceful, productive place where I can work with my hands while building something meaningful for the future. The fuel thieves thought they could take advantage of a young, inexperienced property owner, but they picked the wrong person to mess with. In the end, I taught them a lesson they'll never forget, and I came out on top in every possible way. The next one is a prorevenge story. Initials for clarity. Me, 24M. Me, my mother, 50F. Mom. My brother, 23M. Bro. My sister, 30F. Sis, cheating stepdad, 45M. Chris' stepdad's co-worker, 25F, Betty. The other woman, 40F, Darla. This may be a long one, apologies in advance. I moved in with my mom after her marriage of 25 years with my bio dad was ended. He was a manipulative a-hole, but that's another story. Shortly after the divorce, my mom introduced me to her boyfriend at the time, Chris. Now, my mom worked as a correctionals officer at the county jail. The boyfriend was a former inmate in for a DUI. That should have been the first red flag, but my mom was grieving a long marriage, and I didn't want to push the subject. Chris seemed to make her happy, and that was enough for me. Me, bro, and sis all moved in with mom and Chris, and we seemed to get along okay. Chris and I bonded a bit over our love of video games, and all seemed well. That is, until 2017. Due to Chris's prior DUI, he had to go in regularly for probationary checkups at the courthouse. One day he didn't return, and we got a little worried. We then received a phone call from him, from Texas. Turns out, when he arrived at the courthouse that day, he was jumped by the FBI. His family from Texas was implicated on a number of gang and drug-related crimes, and due to a situation where he was in a vehicle during a drug handoff, he was on the hook as well. He ended up agreeing to testify against his family members in exchange for a shorter sentence, and allowed to be out of prison before the trial. My mom was distraught, and over the course of many phone calls over a year, they worked out their marriage plans when he returned. His store owner at the DQ he worked at allowed him to come back as well, back to his store manager position. Soon after, the drinking started. Now, obviously, because of his DUI, Chris was clearly no stranger to drinking. He began to drink more and more, to the point where he was consuming half a 24-pack of beer a day. Chris was a mean drunk. He regularly started fights when wasted, and while they never got physical, he wasn't exactly kind with his words. My mom enabled his behavior for several years, saying the stress was getting to him from work and from the upcoming trial. Finally, after several years, my mom had enough. Chris came home extremely drunk one night, and my mom confronted him. She asked if he'd been drinking, and when he didn't deny it, she kicked him out. He went to live with a friend temporarily. The next morning, Mom asked us to help gather a few of his essentials so that he didn't have to re-enter the home until he was sober. While we were gathering his things, we heard a knock at the front door. We opened it to find Betty, one of Chris's co-workers and someone I went to high school with. She told my mom she had something important to share. After sitting my mom down and telling her not to share where she got the info from, Betty told my mom about how Chris was cheating on my mom with Darla, how he regularly had Darla perform sexual acts in and around his workplace, how Betty had caught them, and how Chris told her that if she ever told my mom, he'd fire her. He was the store manager. And finally, how Darla was pregnant. My mom was angry. After the initial shock wore off, she told us to round up all of Chris's things and to dump it outside. We took everything of his out of the house and tossed it all in the alley behind our house. Chris had no reason or ability to return to the house. It was rented, with only my mom on the paperwork, so no issues there. In the meantime, she called and confronted him. He confessed to the entire affair, and that he was happy Darla was pregnant because that meant he'd finally have a child of his own. Mom refused to have more kids. We three were massive strains on her body. She likely wouldn't survive anymore. He refused to apologize for any of his actions. My mom arranged for him to collect his items from the alley, with an officer present, and he left our lives. The revenge. Now my mom clearly wanted to dust her hands of him and move on. She was already quite emotional from the whole ordeal and wanted nothing more from him. But Sis, Bro, and I had other ideas. First, we called his workplace. DQ operates as an independently owned franchise, and the owner of this branch owned several branches in the area. He was also a good friend. We informed him of the sexual acts being performed on the premises, and he went through the processes of getting Chris booted from his position and barred him from any of the branches in the area. Funnily, Betty got his position after he left, and now runs a tight and clean ship. Chris no longer had a job or a place to live, and so went to live with Darla in a town about an hour away. We found out that he started working at another DQ in that town and informed the owner of that location of the situation. It took significantly longer due to there being no current indecent actions occurring there, but eventually he lost that job too. Soon after, Chris began driving around our neighborhood, seemingly stalking my mom and our family, probably because of his job loss. Now, due to the whole situation in Texas, he never had his probation lifted for his DUI and thus still did not have a license. He never had to drive when he lived with us since work was local and we could drive him as needed. But here was clearly driving around by himself when he shouldn't be. We contacted the police and informed them about Darla's vehicle in our neighborhood and that we believed Chris was driving it without a license. We told them to pull over the vehicle next time they see it, as it would likely be C driving again. Sure enough, a few weeks later, we were told that Chris indeed was pulled over and sent back to the local jail for driving without a license and while intoxicated. The police also did a search of the home he was staying at and found several guns at the premises. Since he was a felon, he was not legally allowed to have weaponry on the premises, meaning there was more jail time tacked on. By the time his jail time had finished, it was just in time for him to be sent back to incarceration in Texas for the trial. Chris's son was born while Chris was in prison. Darla evidently realized what an absolute ass Chris was and cut ties with him while he was in prison. During his prison time, Chris started sending tons of letters to my mom stating how sorry he was, pleading to take him back, and ranting about how it wasn't his fault, all in the same letter, mind you. Mom burnt every one of them. We moved on, moving out of state. Chris evidently got out of prison some years ago and now lives in Kansas, struggling and fighting child support, which Darla sued him for. Mom now has a new boyfriend who treats her right and cares a lot more than Chris ever did. Bro and Sis moved on and out, and I still live with Mom, assisting her with the newly purchased home that we've been renovating. Life's looking okay. I was reminded of this by a chat with a coworker about cheaters and thought to post it here for others to enjoy. The next one is a malicious compliance story. So the place I work at had mandatory lunch hours we're supposed to take between certain hours based on what hours we're working. I'm an operator, so it's not like I can just walk away from the job if something's going on. My duty is to keep the plant running and make sure nothing bad is happening to the equipment. So, after constantly having to call the old manager about missing my clock-ins or clock-outs because I got busy with something, he told me about this survey I could fill out whenever this happened that basically said I took my lunch, I just didn't clock out for it, and payroll would adjust it accordingly. So, on that note, if you're on an official clocked-out lunch as an operator and an alarm goes off, or you're interrupted for any reason, you have to clock back in and address the issue, and then either clock out again and retake your entire lunch, or just call a manager / fill out the survey, and you're basically paid for your lunch. So, I filled out the survey every single morning, choosing to just skip the whole ordeal of trying to remember my lunches. That's literally what the survey is for. Now, on to the MC. New manager comes in. A month in, he pulls me aside and says I haven't been clocking out for lunches. I inform him of the survey. He tells me that's only for the occasional missed lunch. I disagree with him. The writing clearly states I voluntarily choose to skip my meal. He basically orders me to start clocking out for lunch. Sneaky MC ensues. So for the next 2 weeks, since I have a 2-hour window to take a half-hour lunch, I waited until about the last half hour, and then specifically wait until I see a certain piece of equipment drawing close to a nuisance alarm level, and then clock out for lunch. Somewhere between 5-10 minutes later, the alarm goes off. Oops, guess I have to clock back in and go silence that alarm. Oh no, not enough time left to restart my lunch. I did that for 2 weeks straight, forcing the company to pay me for my half-hour interrupted lunches. New manager tried to ignore it. Until his boss, who was like old manager but got promoted a few years back, comes down to ask me why I stopped filling out the survey. I inform him of new manager's instructions, to which he rolls his eyes and tells me to go back to using the survey. Never heard another word about it. And the cherry on top? We just got all new time clocks a few weeks ago. The survey lingo pops up when we clock out now instead of just a name and a time. So I still don't have to clock out for lunch. Now I just click OK, agreeing that I took my lunch at some point, and I'm good to go. Fist pump edit. Alright, let me add some stuff because y'all seem to think I'm giving the company free money. First of all, I'll be honest, a lot of my job is sitting around doing nothing. The plant runs itself for the most part. I'm paid to react to upsets, not sit here and do a task nonstop for 8 hours, so IMO a lot of my time as a break. Second of all, this is a union job. Third of all, I am taking my lunch, I'm just choosing not to clock out for it. My hours remain the same, whether I clock out for it or not. The survey just ensures I don't get paid extra for a missed lunch. If I do legitimately miss my lunch because of an upset, the survey also has the option to say I missed my lunch, and I'll get paid an extra half hour for the day. The new time clocks have the survey embedded in them. When we clock out, defaulted to I took my lunch. If I missed my lunch that day, I can change the clock out checkboxes to I missed my lunch and I'll automatically get paid for them. So basically, no, I'm not working for free. I still take my lunch and probably take a bit longer than half an hour to cook everything and eat it, but I'm still actively monitoring the system. Anyway,